As of 2077, the Militech Corporation is approaching a breakthrough in the Black Wall arms race, a battle between corporations, governments, and other organizations to secure control of the rogue AI sectioned away in the old net, all in order to weaponize them for planet-wide superiority. Project Cynosure, despite being abandoned long ago, lives on in spirit through experiments to produce a successful human-AI hybrid soldier, one that utilizes the benefits of both artificial intelligence and mankind, while under complete and utter control of Militech. So in today's video, I will be telling you the story of one such soldier, and all the events that led up to this experiment. If you happen to enjoy dives like this into the Cyberpunk series, 2077 and tabletop alike, make sure to subscribe and check out my other content. Without any further delay, let's uncover the secretive experiments of the Militech Corporation. Okay, sorry, there's actually one more delay. This video is going to contain heavy spoilers for the Cyberpunk 2077 novel, No Coincidences. I do recommend reading it or listening to the audiobook narrated by Female V, but if you already have or are just more interested in learning the information it contains, then we can continue. Thanks, Chooms. The data crash was the self-proclaimed magnum opus of the legendary netrunner Raish Barmas, a final grand act of defiance against corporate control, designed to breach all corporate data fortresses and unleash their data onto the net for all to access. But without the mastermind there for damage control, it had a very different effect. It had begun to run rampant beyond its original parameters. Yes, surprisingly, Barmas placed parameters. It managed to infect 78.2% of the net in a matter of months, as it corrupted widespread data and net traffic. But something much worse was happening beyond just losing valuable data and net access. Countless military-grade AI were unshackled and mutated into extremely dangerous entities. The best even Netwatch could do was barely slow the spread, so they were left with no choice but to completely sever entry into the IG protocol net their entire lifestyle had been built around. It was only when the Black Wall suddenly erupted sometime in the 2040s that the IG protocol net could be accessed again, albeit with a large portion of it sectioned off by this so-called firewall, which was, if anything, more of a band-aid solution to prevent the now evolved rogue AI from breaking through into the rest of cyberspace and wreaking havoc. But now there laid a hellscape with invaluable data and rogue AI to be weaponized, that every single corporation and government wanted access to. This of course meant two of the largest corporate rivals, Arasaka and Militech. Arasaka's Black Wall experiments are well known thanks to the Edgerunners anime and Lucy, while Militech's experiments are known thanks to Phantom Liberty and Project Cynosure. But that isn't where Militech's obsession with rogue AI ended. No. They are a weapons manufacturer, of course. So what better way than to turn their sights to utilizing human capabilities alongside AI? While this originally was a goal of Cynosure, it was less personal with interfaces and weapons. But in this new experiment, human and AI would be conjoined. This concept technically isn't unheard of, seeing as Biotechnica had already managed to force a rudimentary AI into a cloned body back in the 2020s. This process basically used a combination of cybernetic and organic technology to hold the implant in a blank brain. Though just how did Militech utilize what had been done previously with their new technology and experiences from Project Cynosure? Well, it is all told through a single man. Who is this mysterious individual, and how did Militech's cruel experiments impact their story? Well, before we go any further, I want to give one last spoiler warning. The rest of the video will essentially be covering and spoiling the entirety of No Coincidences, so you've been warned. The story of this project is told entirely through a character named Zor, a character of uncertainties, one with conflicting memories that blend and fight against each other. Zor was a man set on vengeance since 2070, the year in which his only family, his wife and son, were killed as an Arasaka fleet opened fire upon a northern district of Night City, an order dealt out by an executive named Katsuo. This resulted in a ceasefire between the Arasaka and NUSA forces, in which Zor served. Driven by his thirst for vengeance on the target that had stolen everything from him, he hijacked a military AV and launched 6 rockets at the nearest warship, effectively sinking it. His AV was shortly shot down by the anti-aircraft defenses, leaving Militech soldiers to recover him from the wreckage. Zor was ready to face the consequences of his treason, a trade-off that he committed to without a second thought. But he wasn't tried. He was instead brought to an undisclosed laboratory, where a Ripper doc performed surgery on him. This was the beginning of Zor's 7 years in hiding, during which he plotted against Katsuo, desperate again to avenge his loved ones. At least, that's what you and Zor have been led to believe, a tragedy as old as time. In fact, Zor's story began shortly before the events of No Coincidences and 2077. The truth was much more simple. His name was actually Jay, an AV pilot for the trauma team. During one such shift, his squad was sent to rescue a woman named Milena from a multi-car collision, but his attention was pulled against his will. A young, helpless boy was stuck in one of the wrecks. Jay rushed to free him, disobeying the order to stay put. Despite his altruism, he unfortunately lacked the necessary cyberware and equipment to accomplish this alone. He was a bit of an oddity. Most trauma team were trained from day one to ignore anyone on the path to a client, and therefore was alone as the rest prioritized some corpo. It's unclear what exactly occurred in the following moments, but it seemed that due to extreme stress, he suffered a cyberpsychotic breakdown, causing him to shoot the team's commander, a story all too common in Night City. If not for Militech's intervention, Jay would have been executed shortly after. They instead transported him to a laboratory, where a Ripper doc named Ron replaced part of his brain with ARS-03, a device containing an AI, allegedly from beyond the Black Wall. Jay's memory was near completely wiped in favor of fake memories that would ease their control over him and the experimentation of the AI. That's right, the bombardment never happened. The Northern City District never existed, and Katsuo was never in charge of Arasaka's navy. It was only at this moment Zor was created. Guided on a path of false vengeance against Katsuo, he worked in pest control, namely for Byers & Son, a small company that received calls from all over Night City. He tried to lead a perfectly bland life in order not to arouse anyone's suspicion. He often distracted himself with ads and articles regarding seemingly random and unrelated topics, but he just couldn't help himself when he happened to come across information about Katsuo, always studying it with great care. Militech's plan was finally ready after situating him in his new life. They reached out to him, although not directly. The corporation's chief of security, Stanley, utilized his connections to blackmail Zor, among certain other individuals, into carrying out a heist. The heist seemed to involve a group of misfits, tossed together for a one-off job. The group was composed of Albert, Aya, Org, Milena, Ron, and of course, Zor, ending successfully with a mysterious container being stolen from a Militech convoy. They parted ways soon after, but Zor couldn't get the image of Aya out of his mind. Thinking he would never see her again, he took his coworker Morris for a drink to the bar to celebrate his birthday. There, he saved a woman who was being harassed by a group of thugs, who turned out to be Aya. The girl thanked him by taking him out on a date. That same day, Zor was fired from his job as he took the blame for crashing the company's van on himself, when in truth, it was his coworker's fault. Ron managed to track Zor down and meet him in person. Both had the feeling of having encountered each other at some point in the past. Ron also made contact with Aya and convinced him to take part in another heist since Zor needed money to live and Aya needed someone to fix her failing cyberware. Ron promised to help her, but only if they stole crates full of combat SRG-78 implants or military Ripper docs from a Militech warehouse. Then, he got in touch with the rest of the crew from the original heist. Following this specific heist, as they were heading towards Kabuki with their prize in the rear, Zor needed to halt the van since its engine had overheated. Having sensed an opportunity, several members of Maelstrom emerged from the shadows and demanded everything they had, but ran away when it became clear that a Militech drone was closing in on their location. ARS-03 communed with it, ordering it to cease action and resume its standard patrol procedure. It wasn't obvious yet, but Militech had always been watching him. Sometime later, Zor met with Milena in the Militech offices, where he asked her to help him kill Katsuo. Afterwards, he and Aya went on another date, during which he told her about his family's demise. Zor carried on with his assassination scheme against Katsuo. Unknown memories suddenly began leaking into his mind, ones that were previously locked away. But it wasn't enough to clue him in on what was happening, or how he got deja vu looking at his squad mates. In all likelihood, he wouldn't understand what was going on until it was too late. He ended up trading the spoils of their previous heist for a sniper rifle, and broke into a building in order to get access to a spot where a case of military-grade cyberware had been walled up. Zor took the implants to Ron, aiming to have them installed. Zor led himself into an abandoned flat, from which there was a clear view of Arasaka Tower. He knew Milena would be meeting Katsuo there, and so he waited with his sniper rifle. But when the time came, he ultimately resigned from killing him, having realized that if Katsuo died in such a way, he'd never acknowledge his crimes. And so he waited until Milena had arranged an opportunity to bring Zor to meet Katsuo at his house in North Oak. An ambush interrupted the spectacle of Japanese customs as they found themselves surrounded by Arasaka's soldiers. Katsuo even claimed to be aware of ARS-03 and promised to help Zor, but only if he cooperated. It's made clear in this exchange the climate of the ongoing Black Wall arms race, a battle between corporations and governments alike to claim superiority through the powerful rogue AI beyond. Katsuo realized how valuable Zor was as a human-AI hybrid, one that could act as a mediator between humanity and the old net, so much so that it could give dominance over all else. But Zor refused the opportunity to turn coat, instead opting to swiftly defeat the surrounding Arasaka soldiers with ease, and bringing Katsuo to an inescapable dead end. But he wasn't able to pull the trigger. He couldn't deal with the finishing blow. Against his conditioning, against his programming, he wasn't able to force himself to kill Katsuo. They lingered in a stalemate until a trauma team squad arrived, spurring Zor to throw a grenade into their AV. As the smoke cleared around the bloody mess, he was unexpectedly recognized as Jay by one of the surviving pilots. Failing to give it much thought, Zor missed yet another opportunity to escape the situation he was in. They hijacked the vehicle and headed for Maelstrom's quarters. Zor collected the container from Warden and managed to pick up Aya along the way. Their netrunner Albert was on a personal quest of sorts and needed a lot of computing power, and thus he tricked Zor into subconsciously giving him access to ARS-03, which he had discovered to be an extremely efficient computer. Unfortunately for Albert, his goal of living beyond the Black Wall was a failure. As his data packets reached the other end, ravenous rogue AI devoured every bit indiscriminately. His own clone self had been murdered, and to top it all off, a Maelstrom member killed his physical body at that very same time. He was killed twice. As the AV was soaring above the Badlands, some memories of his previous life as a trauma team pilot recurred to Zor, but it was all too late. The vehicle was heavily damaged and spiraled toward the ground, crashing into the desert sand. In his final moments, Zor managed to drag himself to the Militech container and opened it, only to realize its contents had been empty the entire time. Zor had died a meaningless death. Stanley shortly arrived at the scene with a group of Militech soldiers. Upon seeing Zor, he stated that ARS-03 was a failure and called someone to prepare ARS-04. Stanley, and thereby Militech, had been testing Zor out in the wild. His obvious objective was to assassinate Katsuo, a big shot of their rival corporation. All of this was guided by their tampering of his memories, the carefully selected heist team, and of course, the apparent heist itself. All of it was coordinated to review his actions and struggles with his mission. Elena was the corpo saved by Trauma Team, Ron was the Ripper Doc that operated on Jay, and Aya was there to seduce Zor and distract him from his purpose, in order to test which part of him held more power, and if he'd so easily abandoned the mission he had been entirely manipulated into. Everything had been carefully coordinated. And that is everything we know about this specific Militech project and the characters involved. For the most part, all the criminals die, and only the big shots like Katsuo and Stanley survive unscathed. But let's address some of the important questions and theories that sprout immediately from this. Is this experiment ever mentioned during V's journey? Well, the only answer I've been able to come up with is no. I've yet to see any references to the characters or project itself in-game, though it should be noted that it isn't unlikely that this is branching from Project Cynosure. seeing as Militech was seeking a reactivation of the program during the mid-2060s, only to have it cut off by outside complications like Unification War and Netwatch. Though if the AI and tech truly stems from a connection to the Black Wall, it is possible that this tech was a part of what little they retrieved during this time in Cynosure. The clear follow-up to this question would be, who could be their next target? Well, there's no way of knowing. It could quite literally be anybody and any time after the story ends. But two characters jump straight to mind, first of which is V. Think about it this way. V can have varying backgrounds that all lead them to one single objective, the heist. No matter who, what, where, V is roped into stealing the relic from Arasaka. Now you can think about that as fate, or you can think about it as careful planning. Then in Phantom Liberty, V is introduced to Songbird and the NUSA, who have accurate intel on V's predicament. Songbird's even capable of connecting to V through the relic itself. In the tower ending, V is brought to an undisclosed facility by the NUSA to be operated on in order to remove the relic. But in the process, there was a sudden, mostly unexplained 2-year coma. This mysterious 2-year coma is quite difficult to explain, and Reed fails at doing so. Let's not forget that this could make V an extremely valuable subject, not to mention that the neural matrix from Dogtown contains an AI itself. But this is of course just speculation and quite a bit of shooting in the dark. So if you want to hear more about how suspicious the coma is, go check out my previous video on it. Now for the second possibility, who you've likely connected already to be Songbird. Now when I say Songbird could be one such subject as a human-AI hybrid, I don't mean the Somi we are familiar with. Obviously, she was way too valuable while connecting to the Black Wall to be wasted on this experiment, but I mean at the point in which V turns her over to the NUSA in one of Phantom Liberty's endings. Whether it be at the Orbital Space Center or Cynosure, it really doesn't matter. This is of course based on the implication by Reed that Somi really isn't who she used to be during the tower. It isn't so far-fetched that the NUSA would use this technology to save and further abuse their favorite connection to the Black Wall. Beyond the questions of how this project can continue, there's also a lot of talk on other potential connections and leads, the most prominent being Mr. Blue Eyes from 2077. This primarily stems from the character Stanley being described as having a blue flicker in his eyes, though I do find it hard to believe that there is a connection to be drawn here. Everything throughout No Coincidence is clearly orchestrated by Militech. Even Katsuo knows about the AI and this much. Based on the evidence and connections found in 2077, there's a much clearer connection to be drawn between Night Corp and Mr. Blue Eyes, based on his involvement with the Paralis questline and the Night Corp shards alone. We can deduce he is heavily involved with them and Night City's affairs. So to say he also works for Militech would mean he's hopping between corps and different types of AI experimentation. I believe the most likely conclusion to be drawn from this info is that Stanley is just doing a data transfer that initiates the glow, just like anyone else would. Though I don't completely dismiss the idea that Mr. Blue Eyes would be interested in tech that creates a more personal connection with their host body, seeing as the tech he is currently using is likely just flowing a constant stream of data to control them, kind of like using a doll. The key reason we know Mr. Blue Eyes isn't necessarily a doll is because the orange glow, such as with Haneko's doll, is consistent with human communication, while a blue glow is consistent with data transfer. So essentially what I'm saying is that Stanley would have to be described as having a constant blue glow in his eyes for the connection to be grounded. It's just important to note that every single corporation and government are experimenting with mind control, the Black Wall, and AI. Arasaka, Militech, Night Corp, and many others have their own projects. Just because Mr. Blue Eyes is involved with one doesn't mean he's involved with another. That's what makes the Black Wall arms race so terrifying. It could backfire entirely at any moment. And that, chooms, is everything I have to tell you about Militech's human-AI hybrid project. I'm excited to hear what you all have to say, seeing as many are still in the dark about the No Coincidences book and what it contains. Do you think we will be seeing the story followed up in the sequel title? Do you think this technology could really be the next step in controlling the Black Wall? And lastly, do you think this project connects with V, Songbird, Mr. Blue Eyes, or any other character you can think of? It's a lot to unwrap and digest, so I tried my best giving you all the information you need. As always, thanks to all the channel members up on screen. Your support will always be appreciated, and I hope to keep creating content you all enjoy. Speaking of content, be on the lookout for 2 videos within the next week. I think a lot of you are going to greatly appreciate what they contain, and I couldn't be more excited to release them when the time arrives. No spoilers though. I can't tell you what they are yet, but I hope to see you all there. Make sure to have a great week, chooms, and I will see you later.